Fellow wealth growers, today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about curves. I recently wrote an article about it, but I guess somehow I'm still not really quite done with the topic, and I thought I wanted to put it in a video and give you a little bit of my perspective and how it actually applies to our ideal wealth grower activities and our concept, but more in general as a service to you. And so I'm going to talk to you about 3 different areas as examples of where this really applies. And the reason I bring it up is because a lot of the stuff that we do, the things that we get involved with, the things that we have to consider when we are actually working about on our passive income, on how to get the best lending, what's the performance of the properties that we are engaged with, how do we find them, where do we look for them, what is the performance. A lot of it has to do with math. Nothing super complicated, nothing where you would think you would really have to be a math wizard or anything like that. But I'm really concerned that the exposure, the media exposure that everybody has lately, especially with the crisis stuff going on, that this is actually kind of dumbing us down rather than really being helpful. And so I wanted to give you a little bit of an idea of why you should be careful and why you shouldn't just automatically assume that the things that you are being fed that have something to do with statistics or some kind of curves or some kind of diagrams or stuff like that, and the associated commentary really made a lot of sense. And so I want to give you the first example, and that is in the context of unemployment. We have all seen since this pandemic situation has started that unemployment has been increasing. And what it really means is that more and more people every week are going to their state unemployment agency and file for unemployment, either complete unemployment, partial unemployment, being furloughed, something like that. So then every week, the Labor Department actually publishes a statistic that counts for a certain period of time how many new people have actually filed for unemployment. And that totally makes sense, and it's an interesting piece of information because that could tell us how likely is unemployment going to increase, to decrease, how are people actually in the economy employed and not employed, and why is this important for us as ideal wealth growers is because these people who are employed are for the most part the tenants that live in the properties that we own, or potentially in the areas in the properties that we might be considering to buy. So it's important, what is the state of the economy in general, how high or low is unemployment, and how likely is it that we could potentially run into issues with tenants if they live in an area and in an economy that is relatively weak. Now, what is really deceiving is when you hear reports about unemployment in the media, because there is an intention to make information sound good, and that is being transferred into math. How do they make information sound good? Well, if you really listen recently, whenever every Thursday the new data came out, the statement was, here is the number. It was 5 million, 4 million, 3 million, 1.8 million, 1.5 million, and so forth. But the commentary beyond and above the data has been lately that the number of new unemployment claims has been decreasing. And that's the big thing that has been put in front of us. And the way it's being commented is, that's a great thing, it's obviously an improvement, the economy seems to be recovering. On first glance, that sounds reasonable. But if you really think about it, you will see an increase in new claims or a decrease in new claims is just adding or subtracting from the overall number. So to make this a little bit more reasonable, a little easier to connect to, is imagine you had a glass and you can think about whatever kind of fluid or beverage or something you like to put into it, whether it's a juice or something nice to drink or a glass of wine. You have an empty glass, and on the first attempt, week number 1 or day number 1 or hour number 1, minute number 1, you put a certain amount of fluid in. Let's set the amount is 6. Then a few minutes later you put another amount in that is 4, and then a little bit later you put another amount that equals to 2, and a little bit later you put another amount that equals to 1. Now, if you keep that image in your mind, you will see that that glass gets fuller and fuller and fuller and fuller and maybe ultimately may overflow. That's what's really happening. But what you're being told is the glass is getting less and less full. And that's not really true. And if you think that, then you get the wrong impression of what happens with unemployment. And that's just example number one. Take example number two. How often have we heard in the last 4 or 5 months that we need to all be out there flattening the curve? And flattening the curve is always related to, okay, we have an increase in something, and then we want to flatten it. What the real proper description would be is we want to reach a plateau. But what we are being fed is that if we are successful in flattening the curve, then we would have achieved some sort of a victory. Now think about this. If you had a situation right now where the temperature is comfortably 68 degrees, you are out there with comfortable clothing. Now the temperature increases every day a little bit. At the end of the week, it's 70 degrees. Middle of next week, it's 75 degrees. End of next week, it's 80 degrees. The next week, Monday, it's 85 degrees and so forth. And within 3 weeks, it keeps increasing like a couple of degrees every day. That is kind of what happens between spring and summer. Now, if that were to continue on and on and on, you would at some point reach 150 degrees and we would all be fried and die. And what we are told is we need to flatten the curve, meaning like we get to this plateau and hopefully we get that plateau at like 90 or 92 or 95, because that is kind of where we can kind of put our t-shirts and shorts on and stuff like that and still reasonably get along. If it gets beyond 100 and to 120 and stuff, it's really uncomfortable. But what it doesn't mean is that we are at the same state as we were before when it was 68, which we are being fed as the math, the new math, or what I call dealing with curves. It's not really true. If we arrest the increase from 60 to 70 to 80 to 90 at, let's say, 93, and then it stays there for the rest of the summer, yes, it's at a plateau, but it's still freaking hot. So don't believe if somebody says you're flattening the curve that you get anywhere near back to where we started. It is still freaking hot. And that's the same thing is true for any kind of other situation. When you have a steady increase and then you get it to a plateau, to a certain level, that doesn't mean that the situation is over by any means. Now, the third example I want to give you is to do with investing, because what we are doing as Ideal Wealth Growers is investing in residential real estate. Right? So one of the things that I want you to be aware of is that we oftentimes get asked, well, why do you do residential real estate and using turnkey companies and that kind of stuff? You're going to be locked down and it's long term and it's not flexible. Look at the stock market. The stock market is doing great. You should really invest in the stock market. Well, what we're being fed there is what I call the complete disconnect from the indexes to the reality. Why? Let me explain to you with a realistic example that is active right now if you look it up. Right now the situation is that because of all the things that have happened in the economy and the people are being locked down at home and can't go anywhere and don't really travel and anything like that, they also don't rent rental cars. And if you were a little bit on the edge anyway as a company like Hertz, then you cannot really sustain your business if nobody is renting cars anymore. So Hertz understandably filed for bankruptcy. If on the other hand you look into the stock market, people are buying Hertz stock like crazy, even though people are saying, the experts are saying, if you buy any stock in a company that has already filed for bankruptcy, you need to be aware that it's very, very likely that the value of this stock and the value of this company is going to be zero. Now, this is just a dramatic example that when you look at the media, they're going to say the Dow Jones or the Nasdaq or any S&P 500 has increased so and so many hundreds of points this week or yesterday or last week or so forth. And people get the impression, okay, we had the low point in March, now we are in June, and now we have had an increase by 30%, so we must all be doing well. Now take all these three together. We're basically being told that unemployment is not really that bad anymore. It's gotten better and better every week. Not true. The new claims have gotten better and better because the number got smaller, but overall the glass has gotten higher and higher and fuller and is overflowing. When you say flattening the curve, does that mean that we are back to our 68 degrees comfortable temperature? No, we were maybe able to arrest it somewhere at 92, 95, 98. But it's still freaking hot. And the valuations in the market are crazy when you think about the fact that people are actually buying up stocks where the company is already in bankruptcy, but all of that buying up is added to the index, and then the index keeps increasing even though the economy is going further and further in the tank. What does all of that mean? We are being deceived, and if we're not really careful, and I want all of you who are fellow ideal wealth growers or people who want to actually increase their passive income to be really, really careful when you're listening to these media outlets twisting and dealing with the curves and with the statistics. My grandpa used to say, never trust a statistic that you didn't manipulate yourself, and he was very right. But what is really sad these days is that the statistics are not only being manipulated. If you even say the statistic is right, then we have commentators who actually take the statistic and twist it in a way to make it sound good, and they can go as far as us getting the wrong impression of what we should do in our life with our money and with our investments. So I want to caution you, I hope you pay close attention, and before you make any decision, step back, really listen and look at what you're being said and what the real math actually says, and then decide. I hope you be careful, you be well, and I hear you soon.